Hey, what's going on, everyone? Hope you're all doing great today. So, there's been a fresh update for Lost Eidolons Veil of the Witch, and I wanted to talk about it in a way that's easy to follow because I know some of you have been playing nonstop since launch, and others might just be getting back into it after a little break. We're talking about update 1.0.8, the latest hotfix that just rolled out, and even though it's a smaller patch, it actually brings a few meaningful tweaks that a lot of players have been asking for, especially those who had weird issues carrying over from early access or experienced those frustrating input bugs during encounters. Now, first off, let's talk timing, because that's where a few people got confused. This update officially dropped on October 10th around 1 p.m. Pacific time, which translated to early morning on October 11th if you're over in Asia or Europe. It wasn't a major overhaul patch, but more like a precision fix, a cleanup that smooths out some of the game's rough edges from launch week. When you open up Steam and check the news tab for Veil of the Witch, you'll see the dev post right there labeled October Update Hotfix. So if you haven't played in the last couple of days, make sure your game's updated before you jump back in. Sometimes Steam doesn't auto-download if you've got updates paused, so just double-check that little arrow in your library and you'll be good to go. So what's actually in this update? The main thing people need to know is that the dev team at Ocean Drive Studio focused on stability and fixing some specific bugs that popped up after the 1.0 launch build went live. For instance, there was a really annoying problem where if you had played through Act 3 in early access, the start of Act 4 could trigger story dialogue out of order. Imagine booting up your game expecting a clean continuation and suddenly a character is talking about something that hasn't happened yet. It totally kills the immersion. That's now fixed. No more out-of-context dialogue ruining the pacing of your story. If you were one of the folks scratching your head during a scene that felt like a spoiler, this update corrects that sequence so the story flows naturally again. The other big fix has to do with inputs, and man, this one had people pretty frustrated. There was a bug where, under certain conditions, if you closed a specific encounter pop-up using the escape key or the cancel button, the game would just stop accepting input altogether. Your keyboard, your controller, completely unresponsive until you restarted. It was especially bad if you were mid-session and hadn't saved recently. Well, thankfully, that's now been patched out. I tested it myself and tried to recreate the bug, and everything's working fine. You can hit escape or cancel without fear of locking yourself out of control. It's a relief, because stuff like that, while small on paper, can really wreck your momentum when you're in the zone, strategizing or managing your squad. Now here's what's interesting about this particular hotfix. It's clear the devs are keeping a close eye on feedback from the community. A lot of players mentioned these bugs on the Steam discussion boards and the official Discord, and the devs actually responded pretty quickly with this update. Considering that Veil of the Witch is the standalone follow-up to Lost Eidolons, they seem determined to learn from the first game's post-launch cycle and keep the response time shorter this time around. We've all seen games where developers vanish for months after launch before addressing key issues. Thankfully, that's not the case here. One thing I really like about how Ocean Drive Studio handles communication is how transparent they are in their patch notes. They don't bury fixes under vague language like general stability improvements. They actually specify what they fixed, why it was a problem, and sometimes even acknowledge player reports directly. It gives the sense that they're actively reading posts and working off that real feedback loop. It's a good sign, especially for a strategy RPG like this, where player experience is so dependent on smooth gameplay and well-structured story transitions. Now, while this patch doesn't include any gameplay balance changes or new content drops, it's still worth mentioning what players are expecting next. A lot of people have been asking for adjustments to difficulty spikes, especially in later acts where enemy placement and AI behavior can feel punishing if you haven't optimized your team builds. The devs haven't rolled out those tweaks yet, but based on their past update rhythm, that kind of balance tuning usually comes in a larger update after the immediate post-launch hotfixes settle. So if you're waiting for that rebalancing pass or potential new content announcements, those will likely be coming in a subsequent patch, maybe something labeled 1.1 or a mid-October balance update. In the meantime, let's talk about what you should do right now if you're jumping back into the game. First step, make sure your build is current. If you right-click on the game in your Steam library, go to Properties, and then check Updates. It should say automatically keep this game up to date. That'll save you from missing small hotfixes like this one in the future. While you're in there, it's also smart to run a quick integrity check just to make sure everything installed properly. That's under the Local Files tab. Click Verify Integrity of Game Files. Steam will scan for any corrupted or missing files and replace them automatically. It only takes a couple of minutes, and it can prevent random crashes or performance hiccups that sometimes happen after patches. I've seen a few players on Reddit mention that after installing the new patch, their game ran smoother overall, even though the patch notes didn't specifically mention optimization. That could just be a side effect of backend stability improvements. Sometimes developers slip in small adjustments to memory usage or background loading routines that don't get called out specifically. It's not a massive FPS boost or anything, but smoother camera transitions and slightly faster load screens are definitely noticeable. So even if you weren't affected by the story or input bugs, it's still worth updating just for the overall polish. Something else that's been cool to see is the continued community discussion around the storytelling in Veil of the Witch. Since the dialogue sequencing bug is fixed now, players can experience Act 4 as intended, and that means the emotional beats and pacing hit harder. One of the things this series has always done well is blending tactical combat with narrative choices, and when that flow gets disrupted by technical issues, it undermines the impact. Now that it's fixed, I think a lot of players are finally going to see how Act 4 ties together the tension and character arcs from the previous acts. On that note, if you're someone who carried over progress from early access, it might actually be worth starting a new save to fully experience the story the way it was meant to unfold. I know that sounds annoying if you already put in a ton of hours, but the hotfix notes mention that the out-of-order dialogue issue specifically affected saves imported from early access. So if you still see something weird happening in Act 4, a clean save could solve that once and for all. Plus, it gives you a chance to experiment with different builds and strategies now that you're more familiar with how the mechanics work. There's also a point to be made about how the devs are pacing these patches. They're clearly taking a fix first, expand later approach. This kind of method ensures the foundation is solid before adding new layers. It's easy to get impatient as players. We all want new story content, new maps, maybe some rebalancing or new units, but stability has to come first. Otherwise, any new content they add just ends up stacking bugs on top of bugs. So as much as this update might seem minor, it's actually an essential step in making sure the game holds up long term. Another thing I noticed reading through community feedback after this patch is that players appreciate the devs acknowledging early access history. Sometimes developers pretend early access didn't happen, but here, Ocean Drive actually called out that the Act 4 dialogue bug stemmed from saves made during early access. That's a sign of self-awareness that I really respect because it tells players, hey, we see the specific group that's been affected, and we're making sure you're not left behind. Now let's talk a bit about what to expect next, because I know that's what everyone's wondering. While there hasn't been an official announcement about the next patch beyond this one, there are hints in the community channels that the team's next focus areas include performance optimization and some UI/UX tweaks. Some testers mentioned that quality of life updates are being looked at, things like improved tooltip clarity, faster access to skill descriptions during battle, and maybe even minor interface improvements for inventory management. Those might not sound flashy, but they make a huge difference during long play sessions. Also, players are hoping for more difficulty settings or modifiers. Veil of the Witch has a strong tactical backbone, but some encounters still feel unbalanced depending on your party composition. If the devs add more adjustable difficulty options, it could open the game up to a wider range of players, from those who just want to enjoy the story to the hardcore tactical fans who want every battle to feel like a puzzle.